Hi, I'm Maria Burns Ortiz, Executive Director of the Global Game Jam. We are so excited to have you joining us today for IP in the Age of AI, the fourth and final session of the next great IP Game Jam, being run in partnership with the Global Game Jam and the World Intellectual Property Organization. You can join the jam on our itch page if you haven't already. There's still time to join. We'll put the link in the chat here. And to those of you who are already registered, make sure you get your games submitted by October 27th. The next great IP Game Jam challenges game jammers to make a game that embodies the jam's theme of create a franchise-worthy concept. But more than just a game jam, the next great IP Game Jam seeks to engage developers around understanding IP concepts as they relate to game development. Our amazing panel today will talk about why that's essential. If you're not familiar with WIPO, it's a specialized United Nations agency that serves the world's innovators and creators, ensuring that their ideas enter safely to the market and improve lives everywhere. They do this by providing services that enable creators, innovators, and entrepreneurs to protect and promote their intellectual property, IP, across borders and acting as a forum for addressing cutting-edge IP issues. Their IP data and information guide decision makers the world over, and their impact-driven projects and technical assistance ensure IP benefits everyone everywhere. And that includes video games. Over the course of the jam, we've heard from experts around the world as to why this is so important. And today, in what's been, I think, our most anticipated session, we're going to tackle a topic that I know is incredibly topical, AI. To formally kick things off for our closing session, we have WIPO's Director of the Division for Transition and Developed Countries, Dr. Habib Hassan, here to share a few words. Dr. Hassan, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Dear creators, partners from Global Game Jam, and most importantly, the game makers of today and tomorrow. It's a pleasure to open this session on IP in the age of AI at the next Great IP Game Jam, the first of its kind at WIPO. Game jams are wonderfully simple and radically powerful. Set a theme, set a timer, bring your imagination. We are honored to host you at the UN's Agency for Innovation and Creativity and to partner with the Global Game Jam community to help your ideas travel further, safer, and faster through intellectual property. Why this conversation and why now? Because video games are no longer a niche, if they ever were. In Europe alone, the sector saw 26.8 billion in consumer spending in 2024, employed over 116,000 highly skilled people, and reached more than half of the population, 45% of whom are women. 90% of revenues are now digital, and mobile is the most popular way to play. That is a creative economy and a talent pipeline worth protecting and growing. Globally, we see the same momentum across the wider IP landscape. Video games, now a 200 billion industry globally, is a prime example. WIPO's last World Intellectual Property indicators show computer technology continues to surge. Now over 12% of all patent filings and patent grants worldwide rose sharply in 2023. These trends matter because they signal where investment and innovation are going, including the tools you use to build games. And then there is AI. Over just the past decade, more than 14,000 patent families have been filed around generative AI, with a quarter of them published in 2023 alone. In short, the pace is accelerating, the field is diversifying, and the stakes for creators are rising. At WIPO, we try to keep the conversation practical and global. Our WIPO conversation on IP and frontier technologies has brought together over 12,000 participants from more than 170 countries to grapple with training data, attribution, transparency, and compensation, issues that go straight to the heart of making and monetizing games in the age of AI. Let me offer three simple messages for your jam and for your journey ahead. Human imagination is still the spark. IP is your growth engine, not a brake, and built responsibly and globally. Let me connect this to your world as game developers. Games are transmedia engines. Characters become comics, series, collectibles, mechanics become competitive sports formats, and worlds become brands. WIPO's research on video game IP shows this crossover is not the exception, it is increasingly the norm. Built with franchising in mind, keep a character Bible, register distinctive marks, and lock down license-ready artwork early. Let me end where I begin with you. The controllers may have changed since some of us started playing, but the feeling hasn't. The thrill of exploring a world someone imagined into being. Your games will teach comfort, challenge, and delight. Our job at WIPO is to make sure the system around you helps, not hinders, that journey. Thank you for being part of the next Great IP Game Jam. We wish you fruitful discussions with Dr. Dimita, Dr. Kornhoff, and my colleague from WIPO, Rafael Ferraz Vasquez. May your ideas fly and may your IP help them flourish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think one thing to do, when you talk about the pace is accelerating and the stakes are rising, I think that's a part of what makes people so interested in trying to understand IP, especially when it comes to AI better. And so thank you so much for kicking us off. Thanks so much to WIPO for being such an incredible partner in this jam. And with that, I will jump to our all-star panel. If you've been wondering about the implications of AI when it comes to game IP, you are not alone. AI is changing the way games are made and how IP works. Today, we'll explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and intellectual property when it comes to game development, learning from experts in the field as they break down what you should know about this evolving space. Joining me today are Dr. Gaetano Dimita, Reader in Interactive Entertainment and Intellectual Property Law at the Center for Commercial Law Studies, Queen Mary University at London, Dr. Peter Kornhoff, Chief Operating Officer at 24-Bit Games in South Africa, Rafael Ferraz Vasquez, Legal Officer for Copyright and Creative Industry Sector at WIPO, and then Kuba Kubalski, Partner and Advocate at SSW Solutions. So thank you all so much for being here. We're really excited to have you. And the title of this session is IP in the Age of AI, which could probably be 10 sessions, right? But to kick us off, I'm going to start with a little bit of a speed round, asking each of you to briefly introduce yourself and give each of you a question that will probably be very basic to you, but I think be helpful in level setting as we go through this session. So Kuba, I will start with you. Welcome to the session. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what is IP?
Sure. So my name is Kuba. I'm a lawyer. I specialize in intellectual property. To say a few words, I mean, copyright was my first love, but I've been a gamer at heart, from age 6. So, to answer what is IP, now this general question is one of my favorite because I'm also a bit of a history nerd, and this involves a lot of interesting history. I won't deep dive into that. I'll just skim the top, really. But IP, intellectual property, is a concept that encompasses, first and foremost, intangible rights, which are easiest to explain in examples. So if you have a book, a tangible right would be for the owner of the copy of the book, and an intangible right would be the right to produce copies of a literary work underlying the book, hence the name copyright. And to make further actions with these copies, to market them, to disseminate on the internet, and so forth. So similarly, if you have a consumer electronics device, you have a tangible right to the device ownership right, but you would not necessarily have a right to the, for example, titanium smelting process, or the way the devices communicate with each other wirelessly. So these would be rather covered by intangible inventors' right, for example. And to give you some context in this regard, I mean, the first formal patent was a Venetian statute from the 15th century, which established a 10-year protection period for inventors who disclose their creation to the public. So this is a private right about more about economic freedom and getting a return for your investment. And this publication requirement is also a theme. So for certain intellectual property, a publication needs to occur for the protection to be granted. And generally, as I already mentioned, intellectual property has its history set closely with also freedom of speech as well. In the 18th century, copyright was introduced by the Statute of St. Anne with the intention of giving a limited legal monopoly for creators of literary works. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, if you will. On one hand, these rights allow you for a legal monopoly, but to counterweight this, there are temporal limitations. For example, copyright extends to a creator's lifetime plus 70 years. Patents usually protect an invention for 20 or 25 years. Trademarks are protected for 10-year periods, but theoretically, this could last into infinity. Certain IP rights are also limited towards their territory. So trademarks, patents, utility designs, industrial designs, plant variety rights, integrated circuit topographies, and there are also limitations on user rights. For example, a copyright holder does not control the fate of a copy of a book once it was legally put on the market, so I can, for example, resell this book. And there are also a vast array of rights related to copyrights, which are very intensively used in the video game industry, like artistic performances or producers' recording rights. These are also related rights, strictly related to copyright itself. There is also an IP, intellectual property right, which has huge value and huge role in AI, which protects the structure of databases. So database rights. This protects how the individual relationships and interconnections within the data set are structured. So within the process of training an AI model, for example, there are training data sets. They play a huge role in having a workable AI product. And this can be made to good use when having telemetry, playtime, or user data to provide a long life cycle of a game by providing updates, DLCs, translations, etc. So this is a vast array of subjects, and I'm more than happy to be part of this panel and to discuss them in further detail.
Well, thanks so much for setting us up. As we were talking about IP, it's good to have a basic idea of what it is. And Peter, thanks for joining us too. Same idea, different question. If you can give us a brief intro and then tell us, we know a little bit now about IP, but why should game developers be thinking about it?
Right, thank you, Maria. So briefly, my name is Peter Kunov. I am a recovering academic, which is something I talk a lot to Gaetano about, but I still do a little bit of lecturing on the side. I'm still involved with WIPO and a couple of their online courses. But these days I work in-house at the largest video game studio in Africa, a studio called 24-Bit Games, based mostly in Johannesburg, South Africa, but also with an office in Cape Town. And so the question you asked, why should devs think about IP? Well, basically because everything they do is influenced by IP, will create IP, or will be exploited by others if they don't think about it. Because if you think about a video game is a complex creative work, but it's also a very complex technological work. It has visual aspects, audio aspects, software aspects. So at any given point in time, there are development tools being used to create something new. Those development tools have intellectual property rights that are attached to them that are owned by the people who made the tools. You're creating code, you're creating visual assets. Those things are intellectual property, which can be exploited. You are contracting with people to create voice, to create dialogue for your game, to make sound effects for your game, to make music for your game. All of these aspects are separate yet related because they all form a greater part of the whole. And some of those aspects are protected by copyrights, as Jacob mentioned. But also patents come into play. So with novel mechanics, with the consoles we play on, these things are protected as inventions. The video game itself is protected as copyright, but the way in which it's protected is different in different parts of the world. In some parts of the world, a video game is seen as a film, something which I have a massive problem with, but that's a story for another day. In other parts of the world, it's just seen as a generic audiovisual work. In other parts of the world, it's seen as a book. Why? Because the biggest part of the video game is the code they write, and the code is essentially like a book that's readable by a computer. So if you don't think about IP, someone else is going to think on it on your behalf, and you might actually be at the short end of the metaphorical stick under those circumstances. It is the thing that drives everything in our industry, and it influences the business and the legal practices in and around it. So it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous.
It's a great case for why game devs should be thinking about IP. Guys, I don't know, you're a two-parter. Tell us a little bit about your background. And as we get into the AI part of the panel, when we talk about AI, especially in the context of games, and we've been using AI for ages, but it's more recently, and I'd say largely around generative AI, that it started to become more nuanced. I guess would be one way to put it. Controversial might be another way. But can you briefly describe the difference between the two? Sometimes when people talk about AI, they really mean Gen AI versus, a larger picture. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Maria. So I'm Gaetano Di Mita. I'm an academic. I'm not trying to get out of it. So Peter, I'll join you in a few years. Not now, because I'm enjoying it. And with the things going the way they're going, I'll be busy for at least another couple of decades. So I work at Queen Mary, University of London, and I've been teaching and doing research on interactive entertainment law and video games in general for over a decade. And before that, I was an IP lawyer, so copyright, patent, and trademarks. But I share with Kuba, copyright is my favorite by far. And getting to your question, it is true. One of the issue with AI is misinformation. There is a lot of talk of AI. Probably lawyers have been talking and writing about AI more than computer scientists. And this kind of create a weird situation in which, depending on the definition, there are a lot of changes. Think about, for instance, generative AI, that now it become AI. Generative AI is just a part of the entire system. There are people, including me, that also argue that the choice of calling it artificial intelligence when it's not really intelligent is a mistake in the first place. So we should have come up with a different names. But I guess there is a connection with sci-fi in our minds whenever we talk about artificial intelligence. So basically, simply put, traditional artificial intelligence focus mainly on analysis, prediction, and decision-making based on data. And this already creates a waterfall of legal issues, starting from liability, data protection. Okay, the list could go on for 15 minutes, so I'll stop there. A lot of legal issue connected on that. And especially also a lot of issue with trust and the ethics of using AI to make decision on how much you should pay for your car insurance. And I'm picking up the silliest of the example, because then when you start moving into, decision-making process in tribunals or analysis of court cases, that becomes a little bit bigger, including your life insurance. So it is the use of this technology to actually create a system that, absorbing data, would be actually able to make a correct analysis, to take a decision, or to anticipate what the outcome of a scenario would be. On the other side, generative AI is a subset of artificial intelligence. It's focusing on the creation of content. So, for instance, you have the LLMs, the large language models, that are focusing on the creation of text, and then the diffusion models, or GAN, that are actually more focusing on pictures and video. Now, the way they work, they actually analyze the underlying structure or pattern of a creation, and then when you ask them to create something new, they follow that pattern in order to create, text, music, video, image, whatsoever. And that's the moment in which all the IP lawyers got extremely interesting, because even in the early days of AI, there was the issue with patent. Patent was largely used, AI was largely used for data crunching in order to find something new that then eventually will get patent. Of course, with a human intervention, because we will see in IP in the discussion later on how the human intervention and the degree of control of the human is still fundamental to determining, IP protection. But it became very visible for us that this technology is just the latest of the technology that fundamentally challenge the way we look at, in the old days, decision-making, analysis, and prediction. But now for us in IP, what we mean with creativity. Because is it human creativity? Is it done by a machine? So that's why the massive interest. But the point on video games, because it's a point that I really want to stretch, and I've been a broken record. There's been, and there's going to be, consider there are about 62 pending decisions globally on AI, just on copyright. So there is a lot to come, there is a lot to discuss, and there is a lot to write. But video games and video game company are in a unique position because they are an incredibly creative industry with amazing, innovative, and creative people. But in the same building, they have the group that deals with the technology and the groups that dealing with the creation and the use of IP. So most of the discussion that now we have at a global scale, video game companies, they're having it internally at lunch breaks because it is for them the two faces of the same coin. So I'm looking with extreme interest on how the discussion is going to evolve. And thank you very much for creating this panel within a game jam. This sounds ideal.
No worries. Thanks so much. That's super helpful and just really engaging for all of us and giving that understanding of what the difference is between the two and how it's evolving. And Raphael, last but not least, a little bit about yourself. And I know this is broader than some of the first questions that we will likely delve into more, but can you give us a general overview of what is the current status as far as IP ownership when it comes to assets, text, and code, and how AI is changing that?
Thank you so much, Maria. Hello, everybody. My name is Raphael. I've been working here at the Corporate Law Division at WIPO for the past 13 years. And among our activities, we, for example, host a public forum of policy discussion of copyright. And of course, one of the topics we have to deal with is AI. Regarding your question, I think I would like to approach from a very practical way. When discussing about ownership, it's first to ask how this material, for example, assets or text, was created, right? If this was a transformation of something that existed before, or if it is, let's say, entirely original. And there's also areas where you can combine, right? You can, for example, get the Harry Potter series and add a new character. So the new character could be original, but you're at the same time using some pre-existing materials. So you have to consider this. And of course, if it is a material that is protected and you're not allowed to use, this, of course, is gonna impede you to use this material that was transformed. Although there are some alternatives, and for example, they are usually referred as open licenses. You might use something that the ownership over that material actually allows you some freedom, right? This is the typical of the GNU or MIT licenses in the case of software. That we go to the second practical question is, how are you using this material that you created, right? And this is very much linked to the ownership of the content, because you might be able to use, but the way you use might not be in accordance to what you're allowed to do. This is the typical cases of licenses that, as my colleagues mentioned before, everything around video games and game jam are dealing with IP. Therefore, licenses are applicable. So on a practical example, if you create an asset, you might be allowed to explore it the way you want, except in a certain environment. For example, in a video game where you have to comply with the terms of use of that video game. So not only how you create, but also how you're going to use what you create. And regarding those two questions, AI might even make it a bit more complex. For example, if you are creating a material and you use an AI platform to create that material, what are the licensing conditions on the output of their service? Do you have complete ownership over it? And also, regarding other questions that was mentioned, for example, responsibility for something that you might be involved in the creation. So I think AI touched about those two practical questions as one more element to consider when discussing ownership.
Yeah. Well, and we actually, this is a perfect segue because we had a lot of pre-submitted questions around the ownership piece. And actually documenting ownership is one of the criteria for the next great IP Game Jam submission. We will share that criteria in the chat here. But around the topic of ownership, we have kind of two questions. One is around the coding and runs around the work. And one of the questions asked is, if someone uses AI, and this is for any of you, and like I said, there's one about code and one about AI. And the first one is if someone uses AI for coding a game, but the human themselves doesn't understand one bit of code, then use it to create a game, is that legal? Would it even be their copyright, even though none or very minor parts of the code were edited from the AI output? And I guess also just to throw this in, because I think there is overlap, and please feel free to chime in on the differences too. Similarly, that question with AI, or with artwork is, to what extent does it have to be edited or adapted from artwork to have that IP ownership? And then this is a multi-part, but I think they all kind of tie together. If I run my artwork through an AI program, do I risk losing the ownership? We had a couple dozen pre-submitted questions, and a good chunk of them focused on these ownership questions. So yeah. How do people tackle that?
I'm gonna kick us off, but I'm sure everyone actually has an opinion on this one. So when we talk particularly about copyright, and it seems everyone in the room is a bit of a copyright nerd, myself included, the word owner and author go hand in hand. So when you're going to try and determine whether or not you own copyright, you have to determine whether or not you are in fact the author of that thing that is capable of being copied. Now, when it comes to something like code, so I'm going to take the easy one. Someone else can take the question about art assets. It does differ from place to place. So, for instance, in some parts of the world, software code is seen as tantamount to a book. So how do you write a book? You have to write the code. So arguably, there are some people who would say, well, if you don't actually know how to code, you might not be able to argue that you're writing the book. And there have been some parts in the world where they say, well, no, we're not going to uphold your authorship for a variety of reasons. Firstly, it's not necessarily original. You haven't put enough of your own intellectual creation into what you've done. Now, South Africa is an interesting situation, and Australia has a similar one, where the author of software is seen as the person who is in charge of the technical control of the software. So in that sense, we have case law in South Africa that says, actually, if you don't know how to code, but you sat with the developers, you planned, you created the workflows, you gave the instructions, and someone else just enacted your vision, but there was sufficient intellectual creation from your side. Without you, that thing never would have existed. You can be seen as the author. And if you're using AI in a similar way, in most of the cases we've seen where there is a judgment where they have upheld ownership, we're not just talking about a random prompt. If you look at people who are doing software development using AI for the purposes of efficiency, those prompts are incredibly long, incredibly complex. Some people go so far as to say, if you do it like that, you're not actually saving time by using AI, because you have to learn how to become a prompt engineer, and that in itself can actually take a lot of time. You have to retrain yourself. The answer that a lot of people will not like to hear, but it's the one that most copyright lawyers will give in this instance, is it does depend. And in this case, it depends. But yeah, no, it can be owned. You can be the author, but there are a variety of factors that have to come into play.
Yeah, and I would also add to this that, it also depends on where the training data comes from. I mean, if you download all GitHub, there's a lot of copyleft software there. So it's a question of whether or not you're going to infringe third-party rights. If your code rips off somebody else's, you would be liable for copyright infringement, and then no, you would not own this particular copyright. Oftentimes, lawyers like myself are asked to draft risk matrices, on third-party infringement risk and specific prompt scenarios in various media used in the video games industry. So when programming, exactly what Peter has said, if this is the prompt that you provide, that you need to put significant effort into learning how to prompt as well, then it would be very much akin to how you are a director in charge of various tools, but in the end, the creative vision is yours. In Poland, where I come from, actually, we also have some jurisprudence on photography. So we had a case where there was a photographer generally not doing anything, but people for lighting, for taking mess and framing, generally not doing anything but instructing everybody else. And the court, rightfully so, I think, said that the copyright holder is the photography director, if you will. And with programming, I think it's also important to say that copyright generally protects form, so how the creative vision is established. So in code, it does not protect function. So the function in itself is not protected. So having said that, when AI is merely a tool in establishing this creative vision for the code, that should not, in my opinion, per se, be an obstacle in meeting the creativity obligation. But in practice, may well be the case. As long as the code is the same as the training data, you would have generally third-party infringement case, and potentially, because I get the gist of the question being whether or not there is any creativity involved. It's a very interesting subject, I think, and it's and as Gaetano had said, we have still a few years or decades, as you said, of time to answer these questions, which are very pressing.
No, but timing is an issue, especially when you're working on a video game now and you are in front of the choice or paying a couple of people to do it, or send a prompt on on one of these generative AI. And the question, Maria, I want to stretch it because both Kuba and Peter mentioned it, but these are not new problems. Determining who the author is and who is the copyright owner of a work in case the work is protected has been a question that we constantly ask each other, and the answer might be different in different jurisdictions, and it changed in time. I mean, I wasn't alive, but talking about history, before 1956 in the UK, the owner of a photograph was the owner of the camera. Of course, that changed with the 1956 Act. But every time there was a new technology, we had these questions, and sometimes fundamental questions. But even before that, I always use this example. Everyone knows the Sixtine Chapel, painted by Michelangelo. I'm not sure Michelangelo paid anything but the main figure. There were hundreds of painters working for him. They were doing. I don't think he did the clouds, but still, it's the Sixtine Chapel by Michelangelo. So we had this approach of actually giving authorship to the person that is exercising the right degree of control over the creativity. So I'm using this very vague terminology in order to include all the possible jurisdictions. And this is an argument that we still have. I mean, a photograph went up to the Supreme Court early in the latest century in the US to determine whether or not it was protected. And we're still arguing. I'm pretty sure, I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, a monkey took a selfie. A monkey took a selfie and destroyed the vision we had of the photographer. And there were two cases running. Of course, PETA was arguing for giving protection of the photograph to the monkey. And at that point, everyone kind of clarified, we give copyright to humans. Yes, we also give it to legal persons and to companies. But yes, for authorship, you do need a human. And this is where AI creates some problems. Yes, there are two major problems. Probably we'll discuss in detail later in another question. One is the copyright infringement of the input, and the other problem is the protectability of the output. And the thing is, for copyright protection to exist, so you can have an author and something you own, there must be some criteria. And every country has different criteria, but we generally agree on the main one. You have to have an author. This author, now we know, has to be a human. And then you have to have a work, and this work has to be original. And originality is connected to the human, because even if we have different standards for originality, in Europe we have authors on intellectual creation, in the US modicum of creativity, in the UK labor skill and or judgment, there is always these things. We protect not everything that has been written, but only stuff in which there is a human input. There is some participation, some creation of some regurgitation of the creator into something new. Now, what happens with AI? But it's not new, because we had a lot of technologies before they created very similar problems. For instance, photographs. Imagine all the painters of portrait, how they felt with the invention of the photographic machine. Now we know, for instance, hundreds of years of cases, the photographer is not the person that is pressing the button. It's the person that is making all the creative choices into the creation of the photograph. So if then a monkey comes and press the button, the red button, that is not their copyright. But that changed depending on the works. Because, for instance, for films, we have an agreement internationally who the authors of the films are. Sometimes for particular complex work, we actually had to kind of decide, because every single country on the planet was going with a different list. In Germany, the cameraman is one of the authors of a film. And that's not the case in the UK. So if you're the cameraman in Germany, you have some right in Germany, but not in the UK. So just to anticipate, this is a complex question. But when it comes to AI, the important thing is to determine and try to understand for the output if there is a creative contribution. And Peter really pointed to the core. Is the prompt a creative contribution, or which level the prompt has to reach to be a creative contribution? But generally speaking, if you're using AI to simply say, draw me a dancing unicorn, the result, and that's the only prompt, the result probably is not going to be protected, because there is no, you chose an image at the end that you like it, but you had no input in the creation, in the forces that forced the creation of that particular image. And at the moment, there is uncertainty, because we mentioned already there are a lot of cases globally, and they might be decided differently. So I think that at the moment, the safest suggestion to give is, yes, use AI. For the code, be careful, because you're uploading your code. So there might be trade secrets, there might be stuff that you don't want to share with, even if it's a machine, because someone else might use it, because then your code is going to train the AI for the next person asking. But when it comes to IP in the output, the big question is, are you ready to take the risk? Because if it's just something in the background or the trees that no one cares about, I would say, well, yeah, it's a very low risk assessment. But if it's your main character, your main storyline, the main cinematic, it's safer and probably cheaper in the long run if something goes wrong to actually have a human creating it, because we're settled on that.
Yeah, no, in the same line, I think we are more or less on the same page. But the example that Gaetano brings is also very true. That in fact, this is not the first technological adaptation that IP law, especially copyright, has undertaken or is undertaken, right? So and there's usually, whenever there's a new technology, there's usually two concerns. The first one is to protect materials against that technology. That was a very good example. For example, in the case of audiovisual, when the cinema was created, the first concern was to protect the text against the use in audiovisual way. And then the second is the protection of that new output generated. So then it came the protection of audiovisual works and the discussion of who is the author of a film, right? If it is the main director, if it is more than the main director, anyone who does technical contribution to the movie, and so on. So these two elements translated into AI also follows what Gaetano mentioned of the monkey selfie, where, of course, everybody in these terms of uncertainty of a new technology, everybody's trying to get a sense on a global scale, right, with different messages from governments and courts around the world. But if we try to apply one understanding, is that in order to enjoy copyright, you need to have an author, and in order to have authorship, you need to express some originality or creativity according to what each country decides the threshold of what is original enough to deserve copyright protection. So translating to AI, some countries, some courts decided that by the fact that you write an input, that's original enough to protect the output. In other countries, they actually say you need to go a little bit more than that, not only input, but something that express enough originality. And this is, for example, as an input, a drawing that the person has, and just ask the AI provider to color it, for example. And then the several inputs until you get the final image. So there's different recipes. For sure, we don't have a straight answer, or where is there the soft landing for originality, and of course, as I was also mentioned, ownership. And this, you also need to apply the contractual conditions of the AI provider.
Well, and I saw a couple kind of questions and comments here in the chat about decisions coming down. And Gaetano, I think I wrote down, you said 62 pending decisions, I think. With all of those differences, and with it, someone asked here about the differences across countries, all of those things, are there trends that you are all seeing, especially on the legal side, as these decisions come down, that you see having an impact, or have we not yet gotten to that point?
Most of the decisions that have been settled so far, that they were mainly on the infringement of the input. I mean, on the output, I guess the most reported are, the decision of the Copyright Office in the US. That is not a tribunal; it's just assessing the registrability of a particular work, and the entire series of application from Casanova. That is, I mean, she wrote a comic book. That was the first one on which the images were not registered as copyright in the US. It's difficult to anticipate trend, but of this decision, let's say the vast majority are from the US. Problem is, in the US, they're all in different circuits. So if someone would place a bet, it is probable that not the actual outcome, infringement on infringement, item protected, work not protected, but the rationale and the reasoning might be different, even within the US. And this is what will create the trend. Because, I mean, if you do, a numeric analysis, and you say, okay, out of 10 decisions on protectability of the output, 6 are protected, 4 are protected, you cannot argue that that's a 60% of protectability of the output. What you have to analyze is the reasoning and whether or not there is a parallel in the reasoning. And of course, these decisions are also based on different facts, different legal system, a different rule of evidence. So at the moment, we notice that generally all the case law involving potential infringement in countries that take, for instance, Europe. Europe, we have two limitation exceptions for text and data mining as an exception for training AI, one for research, one for commercial use. And at the moment, if I'm not wrong, we only have one decision in Germany on how to draw the line and what you need to do in order to be considered an opt-out for commercial uses. So it's really, really early even to make a prediction. On input, if I would look at the arguments, most than what the decision has said, and how plaintiff and defendant are arguing, I would say that using non-licensed material for the training of AI is a huge risk. The problem is that at the moment, a lot of training has been done, and a lot of infringement material has been included in the training. And we reach a point on the training of the models that we don't really know what's in there. I mean, there's been leftover. And for instance, this is generally being connected to the issue of hallucination. AI hallucinate. They write stuff that don't exist. They create people with 6 fingers. And one of the argument is, since it's trained more or less everything at the beginning, you just want trillion and trillion of training data set. Sometimes the pattern gets confused because, and so having AI that's entirely trained on authorized licensed data or internal data is safer against hallucination, not only against copyright infringement. And there is an added value of having authorized data in the training of AI because you know what got in. So you can anticipate. Okay, you cannot anticipate what's coming out, but at least you can feel a little bit safer. For instance, you are a video game company, you have trained AI on your assets. You know that the outcome is not going to infringe anything because that was where, if your assets were not infringing, the output of the AI is not going to infringe, and you're also safe that no one else is going to use your assets because it's yours, internal. Of course, it's very difficult, especially small and medium video game company, to have this data set. But licensing is evolving, so it's not unpredictable. On the output, at the moment, I'm afraid to say, on a global scale, and you want to distribute globally, is a little bit a flip of a coin because you will have, for instance, if you can identify the trend, will be much easier for common law jurisdiction to accept protectability of an AI output than some similar countries that still have a profoundly romantic approach to copyright. Copyright is an expression of the most sacred creation of the human mind are protected by copyright. In the UK, copyright is a property right. As you can see, there is a very different approach on what the subject matter is. And then you have, of course, money. Money is going to be a huge reasoning argument because never in the history of humans we spent so much money on a technology. And so there are huge interests in making it work. And clarifying this second point is probably what is going to make it work.
After all that, I just need to point out the massive irony that intellectual property rights, and particularly copyright, is one of the most harmonized systems of law in the world. And yet, there's so much that can differ and depend.
Yeah. Well, and I frame that question as legal things, legal trends. But I was wondering for any of you too, are there other trends that you're either hearing when people are coming to ask you questions about IP? Are there things that you're seeing emerge that people have a lot of questions around that are kind of out there?
I had one
open source software, but I'll leave Kuba leaders.
You go first.
Sorry, I just wanted to refer to what Gaetano said about hallucinations. I had a discussion with a client of mine who's a 3D artist, and he asked me whether or not he can use these hallucinations to him because they are funny, and if they're funny, they can serve a creative purpose. So I mean, it's just a byproduct of the stage of development of AI that we're seeing right now. That we're seeing so much of these hallucinations that basically allows us human beings to differentiate between, an AI product and a human-made product, let's say. So it's kind of interesting to see how this byproduct is kind of used by artists to their aims. And and what about trends, overreaching trends? I mean, AI has a data problem. The models allegedly have already fed through all of humanity's data. So maybe a good thing coming out of that is that AI model owners, we should have motivation to look for extraterrestrials, have them accept our cookies.
Yeah, well, I don't know if anyone, we have more questions here. So it was interesting actually. Gaetano, you transitioned you talked about money, right? And one of the questions here was, do you think that anti-AI is going to be something that we also maybe see arise from as a business model, like this idea of products not having AI? Or do you any of you think that may be something where it's just kind of the genie's out of the bottle, we have to accept it? You see more and more of that? Do you see any divide there?
No, not anti-AI. Of course, there's going to be. I mean, since Lud, with the invention of the automatic sewing machine. I mean, this was humans. I mean, let me put it this way. Whenever there is a new technology, and Rafael already hinted at that, there is a period in which there is a pendulum between the old technology and the new one. And everyone that is basing his livelihood on the old technology gets worried, rightfully so. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my power in the market of control? While the people that are pushing for the new technology are investing in new technologies and they want to take over. If you believe in a capitalist system, this is how it works. I mean, the newer technology is going to replace the older technologies. But when it comes to IP, there is a human element that cannot be underestimated. So if there is going to be an anti-AI movement, and I would probably join it, I would prefer a human to judge a court case. I mean, that can be just me. I would prefer to see a human person as the judge, or a human person deciding whether or not I should get health insurance instead of just having a software. But when it comes to IP, the human part is crucial, is what makes IP unique and so complicated. And I can imagine in the future that there is going to be the human touch that makes the difference. And there will be an interest. And we can see in video games a lot at the moment. People like to buy and to pay for things created by human. If sometimes already it's come up that a video game has been done with AI and or copy stuff, without looking at the IP issue, there tends to be a backlash. Nowadays, we love, organic food and homemade whatever. It's the same with IP. We love to know that there is an author behind the song. There are millions of songs now on all the streaming service created by AI. Those are elevator music. No one is ever going to buy a t-shirt or go to the concert. It's the human that makes IP. Again, I'm sounding too romantic. Please, someone else intervene. But I do believe it's gonna go well for, not for everyone, because some of this stuff we will not need anymore. But the system will adapt, and we will learn to appreciate even more that a human took the time to make it.
Rafael, it seemed like you had a point on that one.
Yeah, no, I just to exactly to add to what Gaetano mentioned, that people like when something, especially something creative, has a human involvement, as we say nowadays, created by human. And one of the pushbacks, let's say, from the use of AI is actually on the transparency element, right? So in order for everybody to make a choice of, I prefer to listen to music that is created by human, we actually need to know if that music was created or not by human, right? And I think this is one of the crucial elements when we talk about transparency applicable to AI systems.
It's a good point that you mentioned there, Rafael, and you can already see, based on what you're saying and what Gaetano was talking about, there is a consumer wave there, and there's also businesses responding to that. So, for instance, the largest digital distribution platform for PC games is Steam, and if you want to publish something now on Steam, one of the things that Valve requires you to do is disclose whether or not you have used AI in the development of that game, and then also to provide details on where you've used it, because they view that as something that legally, and we know their lawyer, he probably said, make sure we know, so that if the risk manifests, we know how to, for plausible deniability and who's got the problems. But I think there's also a use case there to speak to the consumer then being able to choose what they want to consume. And in that sense, there is a need for transparency, like Rafael mentioned.
And even if I can go even further, we might be leading to a situation where we might even have too much information, right? So if we take, for example, audiovisual, a lot of productions use, of course, AI system, Photoshop, to applicable to visual effects. And I think many people would agree that that's not an issue. Should that be in a disclaimer whenever we go to the cinema or when we watch in our home? Or we want a disclaimer only when, for example, the whole script is made by an AI provider, right? I think there's different type of uses and different elements when applying to AI. So that's why we cannot talk about a harmonious anti-AI system. There are those that want AI to assist humans, for example, in visual effects, including in video games. But there's a push, one, from creators that don't want their creations being used to train without the authorizations, and second, on a more broader element, for us to know when we're consuming something that we believe it was made by humans, but the core element was actually made by an AI provider.
Yeah. Well, I cannot believe we are literally basically at the hour. And I know we could talk for hours and hours about this. And I would love to, say, if, just thinking back to the beginning when Dr. Hassan was saying, the pace is accelerating rapidly, even just come back in a year and hear where everything has changed and how it's shifted, because it is such an evolving, rapidly changing space. And we really, really appreciate all of you today for being here and being panelists and talking about this huge topic that is reshaping and transforming the industry, and where there are so many, often it feels like there's probably far more questions than concrete answers at this point. And so thank you all so much for being here with us today. We are super appreciative. And I want to say also thanks to WIPO for this incredible initiative and this opportunity to talk about IP with game devs and be part of the next great IP Game Jam. And then thank you to all of you who are watching and jamming. The submission deadline for the next great IP Game Jam is October 27th. For those of you working on your games, make sure you get them submitted. If you haven't joined yet, it is not too late. You can submit a new game, a game in development, a rough prototype, right? It's a jam. So don't overthink it. We are not looking for perfection, just how we can support you as jammers in bringing your games to life. And we look forward to seeing all of your incredible entries for future franchises. All of this you can access through the Jam page on itch.io, resharing the link here in the chat, and on the Global Game Jam site. And if you have questions about the Jam itself, the GGJ Discord is the best place to start. So don't hesitate to reach out. Again, thank you to all of you for coming and talking about IP and AI and making it accessible and understanding and answering so many of the questions that everyone has.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. It was a
Bye.
pleasure.